Hello and welcome to the first of two agenda specials with me, Sebastian Coe, as we reflect on the key events of 2020, beginning with the story which brought more change than any other, the COVID-19 pandemic. As the COVID-19 pandemic changed our world, perhaps forever, we spoke to the many faces of major industries forced to adapt to a new normal. From airline owners to athletes, we're going to look back on the pandemic with a fresh perspective, reflecting on the decisions which shaped life as we now know it. In March, Europe's eyes were very firmly focused on Italy, as hospitals and health workers there were pushed to their limits. I spoke to Dr. Salvatore Maggiore, head of Chieti Hospital's intensive care unit, and he described to me the scale of the crisis and what he'd hoped might stem the tide of infection. Some people are not taking lockdown seriously. What would you say to those people?
This is a disaster. We need to be all responsible. This is not the time for people to take an individual initiative. Even one single person may really not following the lockdown may put at risk whole region, whole area. This is absolutely important. This is also what happened at the beginning here in Italy. You know, we did not know at which point we should stop everything, because of course there is an equilibrium between healthcare needs and also economic needs. But at the very end, what we have understood, this is extremely important, that the lockdown at the containment phase should be done by everybody, no exclusion, just keeping the active the services which are really strictly needed for the ordinary life.
Can you tell me, Professor, what drugs you're using or you're trying to use or develop? I know there isn't a vaccine yet, but what are the medical weapons you have at the moment?
The true answer to this question is that we have no weapon at the moment. We are testing different drugs which are being initially used in China, so antiretroviral drugs, anti-inflammatory drugs, and immunomodulators like tocilizumab, and also anti-malarial drug like chloroquine. Some is using corticosteroids, but the truth is that we have no clear evidence that none of these drugs may work indeed.
From the search for a vaccine to strategies for exiting lockdown, the World Health Organization has been guiding the globe in the fight against COVID-19. In an Ask the Agenda special, we put some of your questions to the WHO's Margaret Harris and Professor Carol Sikora from the University of Buckingham.
My name's Jamie and I'm on the Isle of Wight. The island's been chosen as the first place to trial a contact tracing smartphone app. But my question to you is, are we able to catch COVID-19 more than once, or can we develop an immunity to it?
This is a very important question, isn't it? And it's one being asked all over the world. If I've had it, am I then safe?
What the world is really looking for, the world of work, the world of international travel, is some sort of immunity passport. There are two problems. First of all, the level of antibodies, which we can measure with either cheap kits or laboratory assays. It's accurate, the measurement, but what does it mean? As we've heard, you may have lots of antibodies, but can you be reinfected? So it's not so simple. Not only that, if you look at population studies, there are now about 6 of them. We're just publishing a study of our staff, our cancer centre staff, and it's mainly less than 10% because of the population even those that have had COVID in the past that actually have good antibodies. And the reason for that is there are other mechanisms in the immune system that seem to destroy the virus even before antibodies are generated. So that's one of the major problems in this whole area.
This time a question about a vaccine from our Ask the Agenda audience.
Hello, I'm Adam from Toronto. A recent poll said that 60% of people want to see an eventual vaccine be made mandatory, while 40% believe it should be voluntary. So, two questions. What is the WHO's advice to member states on this subject, and how do we get that 60% number up? Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Adam. Margaret Harris?
Okay, so that's really looking ahead and thinking ahead, but it's important that these sort of conversations are held. What we'd need to know actually is what kind of herd immunity would protect the rest. So if you're talking about what percentage of the population you want vaccinated, you need to understand the question we were trying to answer before, what immunity gives you and what level protects you. Different countries have different approaches with vaccination. We know with childhood vaccination in some countries, children aren't allowed to go to school until they've got that vaccination. So we will probably find, as we do with other things, that countries will take different approaches. But indeed, there will be overall guidance from WHO. Unfortunately, we're not there yet.
During the dark days of this year, the beacon of hope had always been the prospect of a COVID-19 vaccine. And now, with the first doses being delivered, hopes of an end to the pandemic are closer than ever. Dr. Jerome Kim, Director General of the International Vaccines Institute in South Korea, in Seoul, explained to me the unprecedented efforts involved in finding that key vaccine, our bridge to a new normality.
In 10 months' time, we've moved 8 or 9, depending on how you count them, vaccines forward into phase 3, the final stage of testing for safety and effectiveness. And that's really a remarkable task given the fact that we knew absolutely nothing about this virus in December of 2019. So we have made a lot of progress. We're still waiting to see the results, and our fingers are crossed.
Fingers are crossed. That's not very scientific, is it, Dr. Kim? I mean, we've heard a lot about the ethics of the breakneck speed with which scientists are rushing to find the vaccine. Do you have any reservations about the speed with which we're rushing into this?
So I think the speed is appropriate. And the reason I think it's appropriate is that those countries and companies that are following what we call good clinical practices, which is an international standard for scientific integrity and ethical conduct of trials, as long as they're following that, then we should have a way forward that includes the kinds of safeguards that we normally associate with the vaccines that are used in the UK or in Europe or in North America. And the US FDA is being conservative and in trying to evaluate these vaccines as best they can, given the fact that to balance against the speed with which we're going, the incredible human tragedy that's been wrought by this pandemic, with millions of people infected and 1 million people or more now who've succumbed to the virus, we really have to move forward with a vaccine solution, given the fact that so many countries are now in the second wave of what seems to be a major new set of infections and hospitalizations.
But the worry, the concern is, in some countries, the decision to go ahead with that vaccine may be political more than medical, because there is a race to be first past the post. And in that race, when do you think we will see the first vaccine past that post?
I think that the idea that this is a race is not correct, because is the prize going to go to the first company that generates evidence of safety and efficacy, or is it really going to go to that group that will be able to deploy hundreds of millions of doses of a safe and effective vaccine at a reasonable cost and really begin to impact the epidemic? And I think it's going to be, we're going to have to manufacture high quality vaccine at a reasonable price, and we're going to have to get it out there. There's a huge amount of work that will need to go into distributing this vaccine to 8 billion people.
Aviation has been one of the industries hardest hit by the pandemic. Hundreds of thousands of jobs have been cut or furloughed, with billions of dollars of lost revenues in what the head of the industry's trade body, IATA, described as the gravest crisis aviation has ever faced. In an exclusive interview, I spoke to Qatar Airways CEO Akbar Al-Bakr about what the industry could do to help airlines through this torrid time.
Putting people in quarantine is too extreme. I think testing people would be better, but once the vaccination comes out and people are vaccinated, I think the best thing would be for a health certificate each passenger carries. It will not only save time, but it will also stop each country coming up with its own health regime. This will affect every single industry. It will not only just affect tourism or the airline. It will become such a hassle for people to get from A to B.
Qatar Airways is effectively a state airline. Do you have an advantage over the private airlines?
When it comes to Qatar Airways, like every single airline, major airline in the world, have asked for state aid and state subsidy. Qatar Airways has yet to go to its government for any financial aid. We are still operating under our own resources and the credit lines that we have from banks. It is about how we run an airline as a team, that everybody makes sure that we run the airline in an efficient way and that we have reserves for rainy days, which a lot of airlines didn't consider. They were just looking at giving hefty dividends to their shareholders without forgetting that airline is very cyclical and that they have to build very strong reserves in order to face such big challenges.
You've been leading in the aviation industry for some time now. How would you describe your feelings and what has been happening to the people and the businesses and the airplanes around you?
Inside me, I'm devastated, but I have to put a brave face to make sure that my staff and my colleagues that have built this airline so well don't get disheartened and lose confidence.
Shortly after this year's delayed 2 sessions, China's most important annual political meeting, I was joined by China's ambassador to the UK, Liu Xiaoming. We spoke of the impact of the pandemic on global trade and why he's still confident about China's position on the world stage.
This pandemic really caused a very negative impact on the world trade, interflow of investment, even the people-to-people travel. And the difference between this impact from the 2008 financial crisis is that this pandemic really caused a serious blow to real economy. And so it's really caused a downturn of trade, investment, and the global growth. But China now, we have achieved strategic success in containing this virus, and we have started the resumption of production. And I think China is now in the better place to move on. China used to be the engine and powerhouse of world economy. And we feel confident that China will continue to play that role. The reason we have this confidence is that, first, China itself is a factory. We used to call China the factory of the world. Now China will continue to play such a role. When we saw the real economy suffered setbacks, but we should also realize that there are new opportunities emerged from this pandemic. Online economy, the cloud economy, and especially the biological medical industry. China now produces the most of the medical supplies to the world and provide them. We have provided medical supplies to 150 countries.
Indeed.
And I think China will continue to play a role. And China itself is a big market.
Does that give China the economic edge over the rest of the world?
We always believe in win-win cooperation. So that's why President Xi has been calling for to build a community of shared future for mankind. So when I'm saying this pandemic bring China-UK closer, I think this pandemic also bring the world closer. And it really shows that we are all in this same global village, a small planet. We need to work together. So China would like to share not only our experience in containing virus, we would also like to share, as we did before, the opportunities of China's growth, China's development.
Still to come on this Agenda Special Year in Review, we'll see how the lockdown has affected the luxury retail market as we look at the changing face of high fashion. And we'll find out why the show must go on for theatres.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Sebastian Coe, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now. And welcome back to this first of two Agenda specials as we reflect back on 2020 and how COVID-19 has changed the world. COVID's impact across the retail industry has, of course, been seismic. Shops have been forced to close during multiple lockdowns. Sales have plummeted, putting once popular brands in the red or even out of business. But it's also given retailers the opportunity for a major rethink. I spoke to the fashion journalist Dana Thomas about retail therapy like never before.
We haven't been shopping as much, and when we did shop, we were buying things that were more comfortable, that we wanted to feel enrobed and swathed in softness and comfort, as opposed to strict tailoring and dressing up for the office, because we were home and because we're doing things like Zoom. And then at the same time, we've also seen a big change in the way business is being done. The stores were closed, people were laid off or furloughed. There was a lot of leftover inventory because of these closures, and now luxury companies are overwhelmed with all the clothes that they thought they were going to sell in the spring and in the summer.
What about the high street? How has that been affected?
Well, that's been affected enormously too, because those stores and those businesses are based on volume. Their profits, their whole raison d'etre, their business model is based on volume. And if your stores are closed for 4 months, you are not moving any volume. So they too are overwhelmed with inventory. Many even canceled their orders for things they'd already had made, and clothes were sitting on the docks in Bangladesh unable to be shipped. And so then the workers in Bangladesh weren't getting paid because the contractors weren't getting paid because the brands weren't paying anybody because they canceled the orders. So it's made for a big economic mess, but it's also making for a terrible environmental mess, because you sort of scratch your head and say, what are we going to do with all these clothes that we aren't buying and wearing? And are they going to land up in landfill? Are they going to go in the trash? Are we going to see them being burned and shredded? It's just awful on sort of every front, because the business model of volume is so wasteful.
There are a lot of similar brands on our high streets. Can you see some of those leaving the high street, or some kind of consolidation?
Absolutely. In fact, many brands, fast fashion brands, have announced that they're closing thousands of stores and they're moving more onto digital, foreseeing the second wave of COVID and people at home going, what do I do? Let's shop online. Some brands never even had that much invested or any online presence at all. Primark only has stores and no online presence. And H&M was closing stores, Zara is closing stores, they're consolidating. But, folks worry that's going to kill the high street. I think it's going to have to be exactly the opposite. I think it's going to free up the high street to bring back the local businesses that were driven out by these mega global chains, you know, who are willing to pay higher rents. And we'll see a wonderful rebirth of the high street as it used to be.
Millions of students from around the world have now completed what for many will have been their first term under COVID restrictions. Universities have had to put extreme new policies in place to allow students, especially those from overseas, to continue their studies in a pandemic world. In September, I spoke to Graham Virgo, Senior Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education at Cambridge University, to find out what his institution, one of the oldest and most prestigious in the world, had planned.
The university and the colleges have been working very closely together, looking at all our spaces, accommodation and food spaces and teaching spaces to make them as safe as possible. We are expecting face coverings to be worn inside, and we've developed a testing system as well. And it's also worth emphasizing that we were one of the first universities in the United Kingdom to say that our lectures would be going online. So lectures will be recorded, but we want there to be a significant amount of face-to-face teaching in small groups, because that's a really important part of education at Cambridge.
The UK is second only to, I think, the US in attracting overseas students. As there is concerns about the pandemic, certainly in America, is this an opportunity for you to attract more Chinese students?
We certainly want to encourage more international students, and particularly students from China, to come to the UK and particularly come to Cambridge University to benefit from the education we can offer. We have long-standing relationships with institutions in China, and we really want to continue developing those.
Taking flights to the UK isn't easy. Are you planning to organise some flights yourselves? What arrangements are you making?
What we have said is that any student, and particularly any Chinese student, who is unable to get to the UK and to Cambridge for the start of the academic year, we will give them permission to study remotely until they are able to get to Cambridge. It is not perfect. We do regard being in Cambridge as being the best way to get the most out of a Cambridge education. But for those students who cannot get to Cambridge, we will do all we can to bring Cambridge to them.
The sporting world is one of many which has been delivered a knockout blow by the pandemic. And I spoke to some of the key players, including the president of World Athletics, Sebastian Coe, to find out how they're feeling about their toughest opponent to date.
Even for those of us who love sport and believe sport is the great driver for social change, we also know that occasionally sport has to take a back seat. And the decision that was made to postpone the games was the right one. It removed the athletes from their emotional turmoil, that roller coaster, that wasn't just about themselves, but also about the fear that they could, by training through this, infect their own families and their loved ones.
They're all training to peak in Tokyo. So it must be a tremendously difficult task for them ahead to train and for another year and peak then.
This technology, this way of life, the fact that we're all working remotely may be alien to us. It's certainly not an alien way of life to the athletes. The athletes, if they've spent probably half their young lives getting to the point where even with the disappointment, a games gets postponed, they've learned for probably a decade beforehand to work remotely with technology, with coaches that are not always at every training session and certainly not at every race, maybe watching those competitions, those training sessions 8 hours away, 8 time zones away on technology. So it's really important to remember that. And it's also important to remember, look, that yes, some sadly probably will not make it. to the games because they've been delayed a year through age or through the ever-present curse and risk of injury. But actually, my instinct is most of them will be there. Some sadly won't. And most of them will regroup mentally and physically very quickly.
It's going to be a pretty challenging summer, though, isn't it, next summer? Because you'll have the Olympics, you'll have the European Championships, you'll have the Commonwealth Games, all happening in the same year.
We had to bring all those together, and we've done it by playing around with the timetable a bit and the scheduling and giving particularly the endurance-based and the multi-eventers the opportunity, hopefully, to do all three championships if they choose to. But look, no solution is a perfect one. This is a far from perfect world. And I'm just pleased that we actually got there. And also optimistically, it leaves athletics centre stage in 22 on three massive platforms. And then athletics centre stage for the next 5 years during the summer months.
As Britain enters pantomime season, many theatres are still closed. Despite the government's $2 billion cultural recovery package, waiting in the wings proved too much for many playhouses. And now a recent study has shown London's arts industry could see a 97% decline in profits over the next few years. But a new beginning for the West End has global support. Award-winning actor, director and writer Simon Callow explained to me why the pandemic must not be the final curtain for theatre in Europe. When the theatres do open, how will the performance change? You won't have a front row probably because you can't get too close to the actors.
That's a really grave question, both for performers and for audiences. How close can we be to each other? And closeness is the very thing that the theatre aims for. Unlike the recorded media, what we're trying to do is to create a sense of community and identity within an audience and within the players on stage. In case of acting performances or ballet or opera, there's a physical contact is one of the most crucial things and the most expressive things.
Exactly. This is what I want to know. If you can sort of sum up in a way, sort of how important an audience is to an actor's performance.
Oh, well, I mean, the audience is as the great Max Wall used to say at the end of his act, he used to say, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. You have been 50% this evening. They're 50% of the event. You know, that's what it is. It's them and us. And we hope, every actor and performer hopes that we will affect the audience in some way, but we also hope that they will affect us. So it's an interchange. Every single performance, it can't be it can't be sufficiently stressed. Every single performance in a live theatre is one-off. It's its own thing. It's just that night, that afternoon, what happened in the theatre that time between that particular audience and us as the players. That's why we're there.
What about scenes that require a degree of intimacy?
No, that's another whole matter. However, it's also worth observing that our current touchy-feeliness is fairly recent. We've all seen movies of the 1940s, 30s, 40s, 50s even, where people don't really touch each other very much at all. And all the electricity is engendered by the fact that you can't touch, that you long to touch, that you want to be in touch with another person. And that is something that we may have to work around and adapt.
Theatre in Britain has survived plagues before. It survived the Puritans, didn't it, during the Civil War? It survived the Second World War. So I'm sure you'll be pretty confident the theatre will survive this pandemic.
Yeah, I'm absolutely certain. There's never going to be a time when people don't want to hear stories from people, the whites of whose eyes they can actually see. What happens in the theatre is present, it's now. It's something that proves to ourselves that we're alive, you know, we're engaged and connected and can interchange with each other. That's the glory of the theatre. That's what it's all about.
Coming up on a future agenda, we'll be looking beyond the pandemic at our best interviews of the year, ranging from climate change to learning how to be happy. And don't forget, for more Agenda content, you can visit our website or you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.